My name is Stephen Savage and I'm the Head of Marketing for ILX, and I'm joined today by Steve Boronski, ILX's PRINCE2 Agile Lead Trainer, and remotely by Mike Acaster, AXELOS's PPM Portfolio Manager. Here at ILX, we're really excited about PRINCE2 Agile. Globally, we've probably helped more people attain a PRINCE2 qualification than anybody else, and we've seen significant interest from the thousands of individuals we've trained to PRINCE2 practitioner level in our new PRINCE2 Agile course. Indeed, this is one of the main reasons why we decided to run this webinar today. So, what is PRINCE2 Agile? Are PRINCE2 and Agile a contradiction in terms? What are the shortfalls of both PRINCE2 and Agile that are mitigated by the fusion of the two? Who will benefit from PRINCE2 Agile? How can the perceived gap between the two disciplines be bridged? And when exactly will PRINCE2 Agile be able to help you? These are the questions we hope to answer for you today. My main job here is to keep the two experts on piste and on time. You will have the opportunity to type questions, and I will feed these in as and when appropriate. If your question isn't asked or answered today, you will have the opportunity to email the presenters afterwards. We've got a lot to cover in the next hour or so, so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to ILX's PRINCE2 Agile Lead Trainer, Steve Boronski. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. I was using the wrong mouse now. It would help to use the right one, wouldn't it? But those of you, by the way, who are experiencing some technical difficulties, there are some techies working in the background to solve your problems and assist you, and they'll type information into the chat box, which you can all see, just in case. Okay, so I'm Steve Boronski, as Stephen has mentioned. So I want to first of all take a look at what's actually wrong with PRINCE2 that needed this agile guide producing. And I kind of think first bullet point there, nothing, it does work. I think the problem has been more to do with a perception of what's wrong with PRINCE2 rather than whether PRINCE2 is actually wrong. And the perception is that it's only for waterfall development projects. In fact, I saw an expert website somewhere actually mentioning that PRINCE2 was only for waterfall. And I thought, well, I've actually managed lots of projects and not one of them was waterfall. Kind of the assumption that you can put detailed requirements up front before you start any work at all, and the requirements cannot change, and so you've got heavy command and control. I don't believe there's many projects that ever really achieve that. Maybe back in the mainframe days when you had to have punch cards made for any coding whatsoever, maybe you did need to do it that way, but certainly since the advent of a mouse, maybe, I don't think we've seen many waterfall development projects. Personally, PRINCE2 is seen as heavy command and control because of that, and the documentation rules, and it's bureaucratic. Well, if you want it to be bureaucratic, it can be bureaucratic. But if you want it to be flexible, it can be flexible. It's entirely up to you when you use PRINCE2, particularly the later version of PRINCE2, the 2009 guide. It is prescriptive is another perception. It is not prescriptive, and I don't believe it ever was prescriptive. It describes what a project manager should do in a certain circumstance rather than you must always do things this way. So for me, in practice, PRINCE2 has never been any of the above, but it's simply a perception. So I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with PRINCE2. When we look at Agile and what's missing from Agile, well, nothing is missing from Agile. Again, there are perceptions of what Agile is, and usually, like the perceptions for PRINCE2, they're not 100% accurate. The perception for Agile is that it is completely uncontrolled, and that if you, for example, want your project to produce a drinks machine, someone will produce you a kettle. and say, there we go, you now have a drinks machine. Or to the other extreme, they'll build you a cafe. That's agile projects aren't like that, although they are perceived sometimes to be a little bit like that. To have no business case. Well, Prince has a very clear business case. Agile perhaps doesn't use the term business case, but it does use the term value and delivering value. And what is anything other than a Prince2 business case, other than what value it will deliver to an organisation? So the next one, we will fix it on the next release. It's rubbish. We've got some rubbish here, but it doesn't matter. We'll release it, and we're going to have another release in a couple of weeks anyway, so it doesn't matter. We'll fix it then. Again, that's not realistic, because Agile attempts to get the quality right as well as fix it on time. So the herding cats bullet point. Now, the herding cats bullet point stems from when I was a manager, and I was attempting to manage some software developers, and I read a book, and this book, the title of this book was called Herding Cats, and it was kind of just perfect for an agile world, and it was many years ago, but that was the title of the book, Herding Cats, because trying to manage software developers is a little bit like herding cats, and the assumption that there are no plans and there's no documentation, again, it's not right. They're perceptions. So in practice, Agile's none of those. It's just perception of what's missing. It's perception of Prince2 for me that's wrong.
Great, thanks, Steve. Mike, I was talking to a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, the other day, who is a head of testing at a big investment bank, and I was talking to him because we've got nothing better to talk about. I was talking to him about Prince2 Agile, and he laughed. He's saying it's a contradiction in terms. You're either Prince2 or you're Agile, and never the twain shall meet. Clearly, we're here today to blow that myth. But can you explain why there is that disconnect? Where people see Prince2 as one thing and Agile completely different.
Absolutely. I think it comes back to a lot of the points that Steve's just raised, that actually there's a lot of misconceptions that are out there. If you look at Agile, you look at some of the background and the history to it, it's developed out of a product development area. It could be seen as being business as usual in certain environments, whereas the project is about introducing change, temporary teams put together, whereas Agile looks at having a stable team to ensure that you've got good delivery, that the learning is kept within the team, and that they can be more efficient and effective. There's absolutely nothing in Prince2 that says you can't do all of those things as well. And a lot of that comes down to the organization that you're looking into. If we think about the sort of Scrum approach, time boxing, highly iterative, incremental delivery, well, if you look at what Prince2 says, whilst you've got the project management aspects that are very strongly represented in Prince2, it doesn't actually stipulate how the work packages are delivered. It depends on the various industries you're in. Now, my particular background is not IT, and yet lots of the projects that were around in the place I was working at were delivered incrementally. There was a lot of rapid prototyping and testing. There was incremental delivery. And it was definitely time-boxed, because when the sales and marketing director said he wanted it on the shelf, you better have it on the shelf. So we were definitely time-boxed in that one. I think there's a lot of discussion about time boxes and stages. Do you have to reduce the length of your Prince2 stage to fit the Scrum sprint time boxing time frame? The answer is, when you've got a release of features or a feature set release that you're going to have, you can have multiple ones of those within a Prince2 stage. So you don't have to shrink the time boundaries. Prince2 is already configured to cope with multiple releases within a stage. And I think there is also this perception around the management and the leadership style. Lots of things in the Agile world are about collaboration, empowerment of the team, etc. Whereas Prince2 could be conveyed as being, as Steve was saying, command and control type approach. But if you look at it, what Prince2 says, it's management by exception. I would have thought that was probably one of the most empowering aspects that there is in Prince2 and completely compatible with Agile. So in practice, I think there is no disconnect. None of the above apply when you really start to scratch the surface. So if we have a look at who needs both, anybody really who's trying to be more agile whilst using Prince2. So if you're in a Prince2 environment and you're being asked to look at agile delivery methods, and I know a lot of government departments are moving in that direction, then this is a good way of understanding that interface. If you're in an environment where maybe you've tried Agile and you found that it doesn't have the control that your organization is looking to achieve, then Prince2 Agile is probably what you're looking for. And if you hear Keith Richards talk about this, and Keith Richards was the lead author for this development, we use the analogy of the Typhoon fighter plane. Inherently unstable airframe, but one that is incredibly agile because of the control that's laid on by computers to give you something which can react with incredible agility. So who else might want to use it? You know, any reasonable project manager is going to look at what is the best solution for their particular environment, their particular project. And if Agile is a good way of going, then let's see about how you can blend those approaches in. And again, that applies for any organization. They're always looking how to do things quicker, how to be more efficient and effective. It's aimed also at people who work in a program management office or a P3O and are supporting the business. So they need to understand how this agile interface works as well. But of course, because it is agile, there's lots of elements of it that are applicable to the business as usual environment, which I think increasingly is becoming projectized as we go along.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Steve, would you talk a little bit now about how we bridge the gap between the Prince2 method and the Agile approach? Is it just in the software world, or does it work beyond that?
Well, kind of interestingly, when you look at the Agile Manifesto, it very much says we are uncovering better ways of developing software. Let me just put my little clicker on it. It says there, like it says, developing software. That's the Agile Manifesto that was kind of written in 2001, I believe. So for 14 years, it hasn't actually changed, which it's kind of. There's two ways of looking at it, isn't there? It's either right
So good,
or it's not very agile, but having not changed, and we should respond to change in 14 years. So we can assume it's kind of right. But that's the Agile Manifesto around about software development. But there's so much new product development that happens in today's world that actually uses technology. There's very, very few projects that will use no technology. Even a construction project, you think, well, that's not technology project. Well, it is these days. The building control systems integrated within that building are the technology of that building. So kind of every single project will have some degree of that. I mean, children's toys. I've got a little baby with us at the moment, and we buy children's toys, and they've all got technology embedded within the toys. They're kind of, you might have the odd teddy bear that doesn't, but you know, this little baby, she's pressing little buttons on everything. She knows how to operate an iPhone. She's less than a year old, and she operates it. She knows if she scrolls her finger down, she can operate the iPhone. So there's so much technology embedded in every single project that we embark on. But in terms of this Agile Manifesto and bridging the gap, is that we kind of see the things on the bold on the left-hand side of your screen there, individuals' interactions over processes and tools. And kind of, this is the Agile Manifesto, working software over documentation. Well, yeah, definitely want that, don't we? We want the customer to collaborate rather than just go into a contract, because if you're in a contract, you're dragging your contract out, your project's failed already, hasn't it? And of course, responding to change is the right thing to do in an environment that changes so rapidly. And that's what, not just the IT environment, but every technological environment changes rapidly today and has done for several years. So for me, the problem seems to be there's an awful focus on this the bold side. In fact, they are. The fact that they're bold, I think, illustrates it. That we'll focus on that and tend to ignore the bits on the right hand side. And I think we can all understand that there is a balance, and they do state at the bottom there's value of the items on the right, and we value the items on the left even more. And actually, yeah, I don't argue with that. I think it's a great philosophy. But what you can't do is ignore the things on the right, because whilst processes, for example, you could argue that a PRINCE2 process or any process in a project is around about 20% of the success of your project. But it's a vital 20%. The rest of it is people and stuff all has to work together. But without that vital 20%, then your project tends to suffer more. I mean, there's evidence, and we talk about empirical planning a little bit in a moment. There's evidence from analysing projects around the world that has been happening since the Apollo missions that shows a project with a structure is more likely to succeed than a project without a structure. That's evidence. That's not theory. That's scientific evidence that's been gathered. So for me, kind of PRINCE2 is already agile. When you look at this diagram was produced by Keith Richards, who's the lead author, as Mike said, of the guide. This is a diagram of a scrum stroke sprint stroke time box, whatever you like to call them. But the focus on this is something called a product backlog. And you could ask, actually, where does it come from, this product backlog? But we'll come back to that in a moment. But the focus of this agile sprint scrum type environment is it's focusing on products, and it's focusing on business as usual and continual development and improvement of products. And there's a lot of that embedded into product development in normal businesses. We all try to improve the way we work. I mean, I'm a trainer, and I try and improve the way I train things. Every week I learn something new about my training course, and we get feedback from clients with a customer satisfaction questionnaire. And so I'm feeding back into the process of improving the quality of the training. So we all do this sort of thing, but we don't perhaps codify it as a scrum stroke, sprint stroke, time box. So I'm not saying this is wrong, because I think this is a fabulous view of making sure you get the right quality product at the end. Because if we look at this over here, we have a product ready to deliver to one degree or another. It doesn't have to be ready for deployment, but that's ultimately that's the goal we're after. We have some product that has been quality reviewed. And we talk about a development team and to develop the stuff, and Prince will provide you with a quality review technique so that we've got the right quality product that's not compromised by insisting we finish in this 2 to 4 weeks, which is, again, it's a bit, I don't like the codification of this, but around a sort of typically 2 to 4 weeks is what a sprint could be. I personally think it could easily be longer, but the Scrum Guide says it can't be. It's going to be a maximum of 4 weeks. But so you take this product backlog, and somehow you've got to get that product backlog into a project. And for me, this is where PRINCE2 starting up and initiating a project. Some people would call it Sprint Zero, maybe, or visioning, but it's ultimately somehow we've got to get this product backlog, and that's where, as I say, PRINCE2 starting up and initiate can help to drive that product backlog at a top level, as we'll see in a moment. Yeah, and then of course we break it down and prioritize it into sprint backlogs. And kind of, the beauty of this stuff, this sprint backlog, we'll look at Moscow prioritization, which people take for granted as understanding these days, but it's actually a little bit more complicated when you look at it in some depth. Is that you kind of this backlog and limiting the time to a specific amount of time is how you actually get the things that could be done that would actually in a normal environment would not be done. But that's just, as I say, just one way of looking at it. This kind of talks about, this is the PRINCE2 method And whereas, we'll go back to that previous slide, we talked about a focus on products and a product backlog. Prince also has a focus on products, which we'll look at a moment. As a clear focus on products, it's one of the key principles of Prince2 is to focus on products. So I don't see any disconnect between Agile and Prince in that respect, if it's a fundamental principle. Maybe the difference really is when we rather than a scrum and setting a 4-week limit, within Prince a stage can be quite long. A stage could be a whole year, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to finish on time. It doesn't mean it can't be considered to be a time box. It's just not going to be that single month. It can be several. But the purpose of a Prince2 stage is for somebody to formally sit down and say, actually, is this still the right thing to do? Or are we just doing it to keep people busy? And I've kind of seen organisations attempt to put all sorts of things in place, and because people are demoralised because they know the stuff that gets produced will never be used, and I don't think there's anything worse in terms of demoralising people. And so you kind of Prince is just saying we'll take a point in time, we'll plan it in advance. We know that somebody is going to get together and we're going to discuss, is this still a sensible thing to do? Yeah? Which is slightly different from Scrum, but I don't think they're wildly different, because kind of talk about value, aren't we? And Prince has got a business case. Yeah? Every Prince2 project should have a business case, but it doesn't have to be complicated. But so should every Agile project. Agile focuses on value. Prince focuses on benefits. Is anybody going to argue about the difference? When we talk about an organisation theme, there are roles and responsibilities in Prince. There are roles and responsibilities in Agile. There's a little bit of a disconnect if you want it to be, but I don't see anything wildly wrong and different between a senior user and a product owner. Doesn't absolutely match, but it's not a million miles away. Prince has a project management team, whereas the Agile world will focus more on leadership. So what's the difference between management and leadership? For most sensible people, management's about managing things and leadership is about leading people. So to have a project management team doesn't mean you're going to manage people, but things need to be managed. Quality, I think this is kind of where we really get a link between Prince and Agile, is that Prince focuses on the quality of the outputs and defines quality criteria of a product. Now, in an IT environment, you'll see some of the Agile frameworks talk about test-driven development, and that's precisely what a Prince2 product description is. It's defining what tests are going to be done on a product before you produce it, and that's what the focus of Prince in terms of quality. Plans. Prince does product-based planning. Agile builds products. Where's the disconnect on that? With product-based planning, I think the difference is in Agile we have something called empirical planning, and in Prince we tend to do more rational planning. And the difference between the two is simply with empirical planning you base your planning on what's gone in the past, and sometimes it may be the very recent past in terms of a 2 to 4 week scrum. Whereas in projects we tend to base our projects plans on estimates, because sometimes you've never done this before, and in fact not all projects are like that. I mean, if you take a construction project that has a standard schedule of rates, that's based on empirical planning. So you can't have a standard schedule of rates unless you've got some history behind it all. So I don't think there's a disconnect. Perhaps where the biggest disconnect is risk, because they're almost an assumption in an Agile project. There are no risks. There's almost that assumption, and I know it's not written as that, but there's almost that assumption that because we're going to finish on time, we're going to finish on cost, and we're going to get the quality right, there is no risk. Well, actually, there are so many things that don't just include those three things. So if you don't manage risk, you get issues and blockers, as they call them in Agile. And change is another one, yeah. The change theme. Change control is what its emphasis in Prince2, whereas Agile welcomes change and basically says, yeah, we'll welcome lots of changes, during the project, and we welcome change. We get the right thing as opposed to just going through change control. Having said that, you kind of, when you look at Prince, we welcome change at one level. We may grant the project manager change authority. And if you look at kind of the change theme, it's really talking about, are we talking about the breadth or the depth? You know, we allow the project manager to make decisions at the depth level, or even, you know, kind of team managers and whatever. But you don't really want them managing at the breadth level, because then you're taking it way, way beyond the scope. So again, I don't see a disconnect, but this is where the Agile guide comes in. It shows how, you know, kind of Agile and Prince links these things together. And the final one being progress. And this is what Mike was talking about management by exception. We manage within tolerances. We give people tolerances. We allow them to make the right decisions. We give them authority to do the right thing, to do the job how they see fit. You know, Mike talked about a work package. You know, it doesn't instruct people how to do the work. It just says, I need the work doing in this time frame. So the tolerances is a key thing. Sadly, though, they get, do you agree, Mike? They get misunderstood. Management by exception is sometimes considered to be management by abdication. Get away and leave me alone. It's now all your fault.
Absolutely, and I'm afraid I think we all know of organisations that may be where that's happening. But you're right, you know, planning and all of those sorts of things. It's the time frame. How far into the future can you really see? And that's one of the reasons for breaking it down into something that's more manageable. How far out can you go and be certain of your plans?
And that's all basic Prince2 stuff that's misinterpreted, as we mentioned earlier, isn't it? So I don't see a disconnect between the two. I actually see that they complement each other. And I think the word Mike used earlier, was it blending? Was that the word you used, Mike?
Yes.
Blend the...
Absolutely. We're probably stepping ahead a little bit, and I'll come back to that in a sec.
Okay, right. I just want to go through some of the stuff you'll find in the thing. I don't
Stealing his thunder.
Yeah, sorry about that. You can see actually I'm quite enthusiastic about all this stuff, if slightly cynical.
That's way
kind of Prince focused is agile behaviours, agile techniques, and agile concepts. And I don't want to go into too much depth here, but in terms of behaviours, we kind of want people to collaborate, and we want people to self-organise. And there's an assumption that in a Prince world, people don't want that. Now, I've worked in lots of organisations, private sector, public sector, and I've yet to have a manager that said, Steve, I don't want you to do some innovative thing. I've yet to have a manager that doesn't welcome people picking up the ball and running with it. That's what agile behaviour is. But I've yet to have a manager in no environment that says this is agile. Managers kind of like that, don't they? They like people to pick up the ball and run with it. Yeah, you do. I know. Absolutely. From your team, you want someone in your team to pick up the ball and run with it, and then you think, well done. You know, it's really rare to find people who are prepared to do that. Yeah? I mean, some of the agile techniques that we kind of talk about: burn charts, retrospective, which is basically progress information in a different way, learning from experience, which is a key Prince2 principle. Some of the concepts of agile, prioritization and Kaizen and all those kind of buzzwords around it. We all kind of do these things, but we haven't got it really very well documented in a practical way. And of course, there's the agile frameworks. A lot of those are actually IT based, and we talked about test-driven development earlier. Kind of, but some of them aren't. You know, the Scrum, for example. And this, for me, is where the guide is incredibly helpful, because it gives us some really interesting focus areas that actually Prince2 misses out. So these are kind of things like requirements gathering. Prince just assumes someone does it. And your kind of regular releasing of software. Prince doesn't care how you do it. Kind of rich communication, contracts, you know, and that sort of thing Prince just assumes happens. So this is some extra building on Prince2.
Good. Thank you, Steve. Mike, Steve mentioned before, and I've heard it said before, that agile projects finish on time and to cost. What needs to happen for that to be the case?
a good following wind, I think, more often than not. I mean, I think if you look around, you can see agile developments that don't stick to that, but that is definitely the area of focus. I think if you go to any PPM conference in this day and age, you will still see people putting up the rigid iron triangle of time, cost and quality. And then occasionally you'll see a fourth dimension added, which is scope. And they'll show it as being different in a traditional project management environment, where it's fixing the features with all that upfront requirements gathering, and then you flex time and cost. Well, the environments that I've worked in, I've always found it very difficult to flex time and cost, because people expected things to be done within a certain time frame and within a certain budget. And we often talk about de-scoping in those sort of circumstances. Whereas I think in the agile environment, they often focus on fixing time and cost and flexing scope. Whereas if we look at the diagram that's on the screen now, this is the PRINCE2 Agile view. It's really the PRINCE2 view as well, in that PRINCE2 recognizes that there are 6 dimensions where you have tolerance. There's a tolerance around the time, the cost, the benefits, the amount of risk within the project, the scope of what the project's going to deliver, and the 6th one we've put down as quality criteria. Now it is quite important that we've added the word criteria here. This is not to say we're going to produce something of lower quality. If we want a luxury car, we wouldn't expect somebody to deliver a bicycle or a very small compact car to us if we were expecting a Rolls-Royce. We'd be very disappointed. However, it does affect the criteria that we use to assess the quality. And the example that we often use is that of a radio backpack for the armed forces, where you might want this to work at 0 degrees. So it must work there. It should work at -10. It could work at -20. And that just gives you a little bit of leeway in those sort of quality criteria you're going to have in accepting the product. Scope, very much traditionally, that's the one that is flexed within an agile environment to stick within time and cost. And in PRINCE2 Agile, what we're saying here is, yes, we will dial in so that time and cost are fixed, and then there are elements that we can flex. But for those of you that are reading ahead on the screen, you'll see it says fix and flex, because there's another concept that comes in here. And this comes back to the prioritization criteria that we've used, where we've identified certain elements of the product that we're going to deliver that are must-haves. Now, I was appalled the other day when somebody told me they'd picked up a project they were going to run, and they had, I've forgotten how many number of must-haves within their product description. And I said, well, how many are shoulds and how many are coulds? And they said, no, they're all must-haves. And I said, well, nobody's done the prioritization correctly then. You need to be able to understand what it is. And for those of us that have sat in requirements gathering exercises, you can often hear people feeding off one another so that the list of requirements just keeps getting longer and longer. And it's a bit like your washing machine at home. Now, I don't know how many people use the washing machine at home. I occasionally do, and I probably use 2 settings, maybe 3. But the machine is capable of supporting a much wider variety of settings than I will ever use. So how much do I really need? These are the must-haves. It must be able to operate at 40 degrees, and must be able to operate with biological washing powder, and it must give me a high-speed spin. Yep, that's basically it. That's all I want it to do. But for other things, those are the should-haves or the could-haves. So it's important to understand what are your musts, shoulds and could-haves. And that helps you fix certain features where you maybe don't have that much tolerance within what you're going to deliver, or you've got some scope for flexibility around it because they're the shoulds or the could-haves. And in terms of the benefits, of course, if it fails to jump over the worst case scenario that you've pitched in your business case in terms of the benefits that you're going to deliver, then as soon as it falls below that criteria in PRINCE2 terms, you no longer really have a project that's got a business justification. So in essence, stop it. You're wasting money in many respects because you're never going to get the benefits out of it that you're anticipating. So in terms of PRINCE2 Agile, it is very much about dial in time and cost so that those are fixed, fix and flex the others around what your definition of musts, shoulds and coulds are, or what your minimum business case is, or how much risk appetite your organization is prepared to take on. So that will give you some fixity within it, but also flexibility within those criteria. We were talking very much a little while ago about is this all or nothing type approach, and sorry, I forgot to click to ask to move on to the next slide. We were talking very much earlier about this should be a blended approach, really. We've got areas that PRINCE2 is very good, very strong in. This is around the sort of project direction and the project management aspects, understanding what the roles and responsibilities are, what the quality aspects are, what the progress themes are helping you to achieve. So that's all the sort of strengths that we've got there. But then when we get down into the product delivery, we've got lots of things that are coming in from the Agile world that help us make sure that we're going to deliver the right things to meet the customer's expectations. I talked earlier about rapid prototyping. That's a good way of testing the customer's expectations. This is what I think you've asked for. Does this meet your expectations? Because we can build on it from here. And that's a really good way of going. And that plays into all of those things about open communications, transparency, rich communications. What can be richer than letting somebody see a prototype and exploring it? So what we're looking at within the PRINCE2 Agile book is not something that's a binary setting, but something that blends the strengths from both the project management aspects and also the Agile delivery, so that we can get the best of both worlds. And I think that makes perfect sense. Why ignore a good way of doing something to deliver your product? That does not make sense to me. So let's blend them together and get the best out of both of them, because they're strong in different areas. And together, they should be stronger than the sum of their component parts. It's just that they've been designed to have a different focus area. So let's blend them together. I don't see it, it comes back to the original question you asked. What's good or bad about both of them? Well, they play well together. They are very, very complementary. So let's get the best blend. And Steve, sorry, I was about to run on into a slide I know you're going to be coming on to in a little bit, which will talk about some of that blending. But if we just pass on to the next slide, and I think this is an area where the prioritization comes in. And I did hear a worrying thing from somebody that had been on a PRINCE2 course recently, and they said they didn't really concentrate much on Moscow within PRINCE2. And I said, well, it's in the book, and we went and had a look at the manual and we could see where it was. He said, yeah. He said, but a lot of the people in the course were like somebody that I'd mentioned earlier, where all of the requirements were must-haves. So they were given a product to deliver, but no great flexibility around the scope in terms of the requirements. I think that makes it very difficult. So in PRINCE2 Agile, one of the things that we're really focusing in on is the use of Moscow and an understanding of what makes for a minimum viable product. I mean, these are concepts coming out of lean startup. It's about learning so that you can get to the point where you can define what that product is. But I think it's also making sure that you can build something that you can then rapidly prototype and test it, and then that helps you develop as you go And if you fail along the way, then actually you're learning the things that you don't want to be doing. So that helps you identify how you can iterate it and make it better. So I think that's really good, but it is coming down to this definition of what makes for a minimum viable product. And that's all about the prioritization so that you understand the musts, the shoulds, and the could-haves. And this is something that applies not only to projects, but also applies if you're working in a projectized BAU type environment, where you need to understand where are the areas that you've absolutely got to deliver on and where you've got some flexibility in it. And hopefully, some of the tools and techniques that are in there, like some of the retrospectives where the team can share what's been good, understand how they could maybe improve their own performance, kind of shorten some of those cycles as well within those iterations. So I think there are some really powerful tools in here that are all interconnected and linked to help you deliver your projects in a more agile way by blending Prince2 with Agile.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask Steve to just talk us through a few more examples, but before I do, I'd just like to remind everybody we do have a lot of people online, and we're very keen to take some questions, unless obviously Steve and Mike are doing such a good job of presenting all the nuances of Prince2 Agile that you don't feel you need to ask any questions. So I'd encourage people to not be shy, and if you've got any questions, if anything's unclear, please let us know, and we'll drop those into the webinar.
Before we move on, we just drop back to that slide, because interestingly, there needs to be an understanding of the difference between a minimum viable product and a viable project, and they are two different things. And I was kind of interested to look at this lean startup stuff. It was kind of new to me, but not new. But it kind of it's different from a viable project and a viable product, and obviously kind of you need to understand that. But you can just do some web searching and find out what it's all about. This lean startup is the concept of it. But I find that fine. But it talks about both worlds. It's helpful to both worlds, but not all worlds. Not everybody is going to find a minimum viable product suitable. There are some people that would argue that there's one route to success, and that's three things you need for the route to success: persistence, and persistence, and you'll get success. And the minimum viable product is different from that, but it's just a different view of the world. So it's but it's helpful guidance. Yeah?
Great.
Another thing, this Cynefin, which
a word I'd never heard before. I can vaguely pronounce.
I have to say I had to be taught how to pronounce Cynefin, and it's a Welsh word apparently, and I'd not heard of this before, and almost everybody I've spoken to have not heard about it. It's a Welsh word that in South Wales, when I kind of introduced this to some guys I was training in South Wales, they'd not heard of either. But I have a Welsh grandfather, and I've not heard of Cynefin. But apparently it means a sense of place or a sense of belonging, and this is a framework. This is an example of the good practical guidance that's in the Prince2 Agile guide. It's not a theoretical thing. Whilst there's some theoretical stuff behind it, it's very much a practical thing, and this is something I was really intrigued with, having looked at this and realised it was called Cynefin rather than Cynefin, Cynefin. But this is about actually how we make and how we should make decisions. It's not about categorising things, it's about decision making. And we make decisions in different environments and using different techniques, and every single project needs decision making. Every single project needs decision making, and some of the decisions are in the obvious state where, well, actually we've done this lots of times before. We understand how all this works, and therefore it's obvious. We've got this sort of standardized practice, as it were. That we've done for years. We know how to do that, so the decision making is really obvious. That's not worked, we'll fix it, move on. Whereas kind of projects and program environment tend to be more in a complicated stroke complex environment. But there's obvious things within projects, and there are complicated things within projects. But when we talk about complicated and complex, the decision making is different. It has to be driven by different information and different experimentation and different ways of discovering this in terms of complicated and complex. And then there's the chaotic bit, which is you're in chaos. Kind of in an extreme situation, you've got a fire, you're in chaos, the building's suddenly caught fire. Well, it's never happened before, don't know quite what to do. That's what chaos means. That's decision making, and that really has to be bang. You kind of really got command and control in place if you're in emergency environments, and in fact in an emergency environment it's probably not chaotic to them, it's probably more obvious. But for most of us, those sort of things are chaotic, and we don't quite know how to make decisions. So they've got to be act straight away, which you have to do, and then sense and respond. But you've got to take some action, get people out of the building. Nobody's going, right, okay. So that's what that decision making is there, which is different from the obvious. Yeah. And there's, on the diagram, I kind of like this diagram, which I think is exclusive to the AXELOS guide, isn't it? Where you have the cliff, where you drop over from the obvious to the chaotic, and it's actually quite common apparently how we think something's really obvious, but because we are complacent in our decision making, actually drop off the obvious into the chaotic very, very rapidly, because we expect complacency because we know how all this works. Yeah, fine. Yeah. And all of a sudden something comes and sweeps the carpet away from underneath you, and you drop into the chaotic really easily. Yeah. And the disorder bit in the middle is actually where we don't have a clue where we are or what we're doing, and we've really not analysed any of it.
Across many organisations.
Yeah, I've worked for most of them, and
present company excluded.
apart from my ILX, but that's where we go back and into our default setting, as it were. But the default setting, you might be default setting because everything's obvious to you. You work in a complicated environment or a complex environment, and kind of the difference between the two is kind of up to kind of people to define. But there's complicated and complex. Complicated is a Formula One car. Complex is kind of building the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Kind of they're both a degree of complicated, but complex. It's got all that uncertainty around. So there's that. Disorder is where you just go back to your default setting as an individual. And that's helpful for everybody, whether in a project environment or an agile environment. It's kind of helpful for everybody, isn't it?
Good. Can we just go back a second?
Yeah, sure.
We've just had a couple of questions that I think refer to the previous slide. So we've had do you apply Moscow twice to the product and also to the project? And I would only Moscow product or set requirements. Sorry, it's an answer, I think, to the question. So who wants to pick this one up? Would you apply Moscow twice?
I was going to say there are two sort of areas that prioritization comes in. Obviously, within the feature sets that you're going to be defining your product by, you will need to understand which of those are musts, shoulds and could haves. But of course, when you get into the agile delivery, the agile team will be working out the priority list within their sprint backlog. So it'll be up to them to sort of work out the priority of their feature sets once the project's up and running.
Interestingly, on answering your question, Dave, on the course I've just finished designing for ILX, the classroom-based course, I've got Moscow in twice actually. Not because it should be in twice, but there's a sort of initial prioritization of a case study that we're going to be kind of a lot of practical activity. We're doing initial prioritization, and they do a further prioritization, and then even more prioritization to illustrate. Actually, it's probably more than twice. Dave, is that what you were saying, Mike? Yeah.
It probably never goes away, does it, really? If you think about changes, then you've got to look at what the impacts are on the priorities that you've previously had and how those might be accommodated. Are you going to trade features in and out of the product description? All of these sorts of things come into play, don't they?
Yeah, it's that sort of balancing the two and constantly revisiting every sprint. You'd revisit the priorities of that sprint.
Okay, good. I'm just keeping a note of the time, so we need to move on. Steve, you're going to talk about another example.
Yeah, this is another example that's specific to the guide, and this is called the Agileometer, which I love. I love the word. I know there was some confusion as to whether it was a good word or not. The Agileometer, but I like it. It's good. Yeah. And the kind of reason I've illustrated this is that there are certain elements of the Agile community which I don't want to devalue, but there's an understanding that actually there are no risks with Agile, and it's inherently safe. And I can't disagree. There are no risks to time, and there are no risks to costs, and we minimise the risks to quality, and we don't risk scope because we've got all this stuff in place. And I can't disagree with that. But in a project environment, there's a whole lot more than just those things. The whole environment can change quite dramatically. Things can happen that are completely outside your control that you need to manage as a risk. And that's where this, I think the PRINCE2 Agile builds on both the PRINCE2 risk management, which focuses on managing specific risks to a specific project with a process, and the Agile environment, which essentially says, well, we don't worry about risk because things are going to finish on time anyway. And the biggest risk is the risk of wasting a month's cost on a sprint. It's not a tremendous amount of risk, but there's more than that. And I think what this illustrates is just within a project environment, how risky is using Agile in a project environment. And similarly, how risky is using Prince in an Agile environment. So that this sort of combines those two things beautifully together so that we can get some sense into that sort of wider environment. There is a sort of question coming in.
I think as well, Steve.
Yeah, sorry. Go on. Yes, Mike.
So I was just going to say, I think this also plays into what I was talking about. This isn't a binary setting. This is about blending. And I think the Agileometer is there to help us understand how supportive the environment might be, the nature of the project that we're working on, and therefore the degree of Agile that we can live within the particular project and the environment that we're in. And it just helps us understand that blending process a little bit further.
Yeah, and as I say, it was kind of whether you're Agile or whether you're Prince, it's going to help you, isn't it? Whether you manage a project on a project environment or talking about just Agile, but it's helpful
Absolutely.
for both environments because you can actually think well, I'm not as Agile as I thought I was, therefore I maybe need to introduce a bit of control, or I'm too Agile. Do you want people being Agile with your security system? Some would say yes, actually, but I'm not going to go into that. Yeah.
Steve, would you like to pick up Daryl's question about, or Mike, are both Agile and PRINCE2 projects not both open to risks in the wider environment?
They definitely are, Daryl. I 100% agree with you. So to suggest that there are no risks associated with Agile, that there are, it's a different set of risks, I think, in terms of Agile, but that pestle wider environment is just as valid in any environment. Mike, would you agree?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right. Sometimes the focus in Agile is because we've only got these short sprints, the risk is restricted to that next sort of 2-week window of the sprint session that we've got. And that's where you need some of those external sensing that you're going to get with PRINCE2, where you're going to be looking at the business case and the external factors that are going to impact that.
Okay, so again, showing how it complements both. Yeah.
Steve, just one final example I'd like you to talk through.
Well, this people, this is what people describe as Kanban, although kind of if you look at the sort of history of Kanban, it's not quite this, but this is described as a Kanban board, and whether you're using PRINCE2 or Agile, this could be a helpful thing to you. So it's kind of illustrating. I'm just going to pick the mouse up and move wherever it is, so I'm not left-handed. But we've got we've got a sort of a very visible board showing progress, really. And this could be a plan as well. I mean, this is what Kanban is. It's about pulling information and making things visible, setting limits on the amount of work that can be done, and of course dealing with feedback. But ultimately, what Kanban is about managing the flow through a system. So we go from here to here by managing the flow through, as opposed to setting a time box and sprints. So Kanban and Sprint and Scrum are actually kind of two different things, but they can complement each other. Again, it's the same with kind of Prince. You could argue that this is, well, we have for our stage, we have these things that are ready, we've planned a stage and we've got these things ready, we're going to build these now, so I'm going to send out work packages for those, and these things are in test, and this is ready and this is done. Yeah, so kind of this ready to deploy and done, as opposed to ready, and the guide explains what it is. I don't want to go into that now because we've only got a few minutes left, but it's just basically a visual example, again, in the guide, that kind of helps you put these management things into some common sense. Because I saw a presentation about at the BCS, the British Computer Society, where a guy was using this to improve the morale of his team. It didn't work. The reason it didn't work was because they didn't have a business case for the stuff they were doing, so they were still demoralised. But he was trying to use this to improve the morale of his team. So it's useful stuff, and it helped to a degree, but they're still demoralised because no one was using the stuff they were producing.
Yes. Yes.
So it's basically, again, it's good practical guidance that's available.
Great, thank you. Mike, would you... Right mouse. Yeah.
Sorry.
Mike, would you be able to just kind of wrap up now? We've got our just the last couple of slides, but just kind of summarise what we've spoken about today and the advantages and benefits of PRINCE2 Agile.
Okay, I mean, I think we've looked at a variety of situations where PRINCE2 Agile applies, and it can be applied not only to the project environment but also to BAU, to product development, and the project environment itself. And I think the guide that we've got builds on PRINCE2, but we were very keen that we didn't just reinvent our own Agile approach. So we've really focused in on how PRINCE2 interfaces with the major Agile approaches that have been adopted. So it's got a bias, and it's got a bias to Scrum and Kanban and things like that. I'll hold my hand up, but we wanted to make sure we were hitting all of those sort of big ticket items off when we were looking at the interface. And it is about this blending of Agile with the project management approaches so that you can get control with agility. You can handle some of those changes. And it depends a little bit, is this going to impact on the product description, the project product description, or is this just going to impact within the sprint? Because if it's just impacting within the sprint, that's something that the sprint teams can deal with. If it's impacting on the project product description, that's a whole other matter, and that's when you get into that escalation routes. But it does focus on delivery on time and on budgets, because we're going to dial in the tolerances in that hexagon diagram so that we've fixed time and cost. And hopefully then protect the quality by flexing the scope that we're going to be delivering, or by flexing some of the criteria we're going to judge it on, depending on that Moscow prioritization. And I think you can use PRINCE2 to measure the progress. And sometimes we talk about progress reporting, and we think in terms of documentation. But as Daryl's just sort of put on the board, it could be a photograph of your Kanban board, if that's what you're using. And you just email that to the project manager periodically, or better still, get the project manager down and get him to have a look at it and talk him through it. There are all sorts of ways about doing these things. It's about rich communication, and these are just the tools that you can use to do it, because we need to get to the point where we've got a common understanding. We're all trying to add value to our organizations, and therefore we need to look at the best way of doing it. We need to be a bit more open and communicative, probably, if we're honest, and we need to get these much more collaborative approaches going so that we can deliver our projects on time and on budget.
Great, thank you. I'd like to thank Mike and Steve for today's session. I'm going to judge the fact that in the hour that they've been talking, only 2 people have dropped off out of the session, so which is, I'll take that as a good sign that you had a captive audience there who were interested and engaged in what in what was being said. I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't inform you guys that we are now offering courses in PRINCE2 Agile, and the first courses in September and October are filling up quickly. We'll email you will be tomorrow. We'll email you tomorrow a link to the recording of this session, and you can see there you've got the details of both Steve and Mike. No, it's not. We will send you the details of both Steve and Mike, and then you can contact them directly if you have any questions. Is there any questions coming in now? There's lots of nice thank yous, which are very much appreciated.
They're answering their own questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Which self-organising.
Yeah, exactly.
Self-organising.
Absolutely.
Very handy. And to prove, with just 1 minute of the hour to prove that we're
finished on time.
Well organised and efficient. So, thank you, everybody. As I said, we'll send you the details and you'll be able to contact Mike and Steve directly if you have any more specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.